This is an analysis of the book Young Pioneers, or by the old title Let the Hurricane Roar. This is a book written by Rose Wilder Lane, published in 1933. For reference, the stock market crashed in 1929, and the first Little House book was published in 1932. Some of the same things that we saw in the book On the Banks of Plum Creek were in this book. For example, on the first page, it opens up with a map of Wild Plum Creek, whereas in the other book, it's just referred to as Plum Creek. You can also check out the two-part videos on this channel where our family walked by the real dugout location on Plum Creek in southwest Minnesota last year, near the town of Walnut Grove, Minnesota. So the book opens up with a description of the main characters, David and Molly. David seems to be based on her grandpa Charles, and Molly seems to be based on her grandma Caroline, because the text implies that they knew each other when they were still children, and Charles and Caroline were neighbors in eastern Wisconsin once upon a time. So that's where I arrived at with that. The family lore that comes across in the writing of the Little House books is also present here. There is talk of big woods, some of the same expressive writing that takes you into a scene, like it does in the other books. There's a mention of getting a book of poetry as a gift, which I think is referenced in one of the later books as a Christmas present or a birthday present of some kind. Also, they talk about the dad having to get a job at the railroad, finding work to pay for things. In the other books, Pa worked on a railroad and on the shores of Silver Lake. So some of the other things I noticed was the wording was still the same. Slough for marsh, same tendency to put in whole lyrics of music into a book as was done in the other books. There's a talk about strikes from railroad workers who weren't paid, dugouts, and also the phrase that the government has enough money to buy everyone a farm. In this book, a cottonwood whose seeds are stored for replanting is a family story that if you ever go to the Smet farm homestead, there's still some cottonwoods. I think there's 6 that were planted by Pa by saving the seed of a cottonwood where they made camp one day. Since it's a prairie, a lot of those trees had to be planted. There's also mentioning twisting hay into logs since there's no wood on the prairie, similar to what they had to do in the book The Long Winter. Story-wise, they get married, they moved west, found a piece of land to homestead, built a soddy, which is a sod structure to live in, and they had a baby, and they were tilling the fields and planting wheat. In the Little House books, similar to the wording in the other books, there's a Scottish or at least the Old World words interwoven into everyday usage that I noticed. Knoll, jostle, we, tawny, words like that. In this book, instead, it's jolt instead of jostle, fret instead of cry, cyclone rather than tornado. There's really interesting word choices being used to make the writing original. But back to the plot, there's the mention of buying separate little pieces of glass, looking forward to having a window. There's also the grasshopper part of the story. And the story accelerates and moves high in anticipation of so much money for a harvest. And then there's the catharsis when, well, you'll just have to read the story. The writing seemed to be descriptive, although it uses a lot of narration breaks, though not as many as are used in the Little House books. Reading the book overall was a wonderful experience, and it felt like the words were poetic and well suited to be by one another. The book was short enough that I was able to read it in one sitting, finishing it in about 3 hours. I don't want to give any more information or spoil it if you ever want to read it yourself. I think that there's a lot that can be said about the structure of the story, although it's more subtle. There's all the parts present that make a good story. There's an introduction, there's a theme of values, faith, homesteading, and the need to have determination if you're going to survive in pioneer country. Catalyst, when the grasshoppers arrive. A fun and games section where you get to dream of what you would do with all the money you'd get from a good harvest, and then the rest of the story that you'll need to read to discover for yourself. Thanks for listening.